Okay, well, it's a great pleasure to be a part of this session. Let me emphasize more than I ever have before that I'm going to be speaking this afternoon as an individual and not in my function as chair of this committee. My first comment is that I've never been comfortable with the name of the committee. I don't recall that I came up with it, but I've taken a lot of ribbing that I don't deserve for the name. And in my CV, the committee is called the National Bureau Business Cycle Chronology Committee. Dating is, it's become to have such a strong meaning, and I guess I say that. Okay. So let me start by saying that I very strongly agree with the basic thrust of the Romer's paper, that we need to focus on measures of economic slack and rather than on output. I think what we've come to understand is that movements of real GDP are pretty powerful from sources other than anything that we'd call a business cycle. There is essentially a productivity cycle in the U.S. It's even more random than the business cycle. We've had decades of high productivity growth and decades of low productivity growth, and that has been confusing. And since I don't think anyone believes that should be considered part of the business cycle, we need to filter, and I don't think that typical filtering methods, just based on trying to filter out the lower frequencies, are really up to that job. And I've argued this outside the committee. Well, by the way, I did want to mention one thing. Codes of conduct have become a big deal, and the National Bureau recently adopted one. But the Business Cycle Dating Committee was by far the first organization within the National Bureau that had to have a code of conduct. I won't go into why or who, but it's been an interesting job being chairing the committee. Okay, so then I want to turn. Let me be sure I'm. Okay. So let me turn just briefly to the topic of what you get if you use an indicator that is rooted in the concept of slack as opposed to looking at output itself. The measure I'm going to use, which I think I've argued in print on this point, I think the best measure is based on unemployment. To make it positively associated with a cycle, though, let's call it employment. The employment rate is just 1 minus the unemployment rate. Okay, so with that definition, then you can sort of keep the signs right. And so the first thing I would show you is actually a picture from a paper that I've been working on recently that shows that the business cycle is quite uniform. In particular, it's very uniform with respect to recoveries. My view of the business cycle today is that there's a lot of different reasons why unemployment rises, output falls, and the recession begins. Most recently, it was clearly related to the financial crisis. But if you go back, say, to the 81-82 recession, it wasn't so much a financial crisis. It was a very strong reversal of monetary policy. So I think the things that explain recessions are heterogeneous. What is remarkable is how homogeneous the recoveries are. So the blue bars show the annual rates of recovery of this indicator, 1 minus the unemployment rate. So it's just the number of points of unemployment that fall each year during recoveries. And it moves within quite a narrow band. You have to normalize it by the length of the recovery. Notice that the current recovery, even if it ended in January of 2020, is by far the biggest recovery during the period that I regard as where we have reliable data. the unemployment rate really didn't exist until, in its current form, until 1948, when the current population survey was launched. So the magnitude of recoveries has gotten bigger, and by far the record-setting is the current one. But in terms of annual rates of growth or shrinkage of unemployment, it's toward the top. You know, people talk about this recovery as if it was slow, but that's because they're mesmerized by the low rate of productivity growth. In terms of reducing slack, this has actually been one of the more vigorous recoveries. And in terms of total recovery, it's by far the biggest, as you can see from the red line. So this results in a very different view of the business cycle from what you read from many economists and totally in the financial press. Okay, good. So let's have a new NBER chronology. I'm not even in my independent self necessarily arguing that this is going to take over, but it seems to me that we ought to be looking at this. And if you just literally find the high points and low points of unemployment, and in every low point is a business cycle peak, and every high point is a business cycle trough, then you get a chronology which overlaps almost perfectly with the existing chronology, as shown here, except that you notice, so in the third column of each panel is the discrepancy in the number of months between the two chronologies. A positive number means that the peak occurs earlier, and a negative number that the trough occurs later. And you can see that recessions are rather more lengthy in the new chronology. Unemployment reaches its peak well before the National Bureau peak, sometimes extremely as recently. And the trough, and this is well known, the trough comes afterwards. The recovery that the committee has come up with is almost invariably before unemployment actually starts downward. But it strongly confirms that the thing that the Bureau has done historically over this period, when we've had very good data, is something that should be called a recession, because there's a complete overlap between the events. It's only a question of the timing of the beginning and the end. Okay, so much for the committee. The papers here were somewhat slanted, I thought, toward the early history of the Bureau. The Bureau meant nothing to me until Martin Feldstein took over. This is mainly a blurb for something that Jim Paterba organized in the memorial to Marty. And if you follow either of these sets of instructions, the first is infallible. The second depends on your relationship with Google. Everyone gets a different result of any given, every result of a search is customized. So for some of you this may work and some of it may not work, but one or the other. And then Jim gave a very nice talk for 13 minutes. So if you go 13 minutes into it, then you get about 10 minutes of me talking at some length about how I subverted Marty's creation of the new National Bureau in a way that it took on, held up. So, and he didn't resist it. So it was welcome subversion as far as he was concerned. But Marty came in at a time when the board wanted a pivot, and they wanted a president who would make something more important to macroeconomics and business cycle analysis and human capital and the other areas, but a bigger deal. So they hired Marty to do that, and they gave him pretty powerful tools to do that. And so Marty just rebuilt the Bureau from ground up. He had this concept. So first of all, it was his basic thought was that the Bureau should be a coordinating event. Oh, wait a minute, that wasn't 5 minutes. Okay, all right, well.
We can use the Hamilton algorithm,
okay.
But.
Everything I was about to say, I said before at the tribute, so I'll just stop now. And you can tune this in as a National Bureau video.
Yeah, okay, good, thank you.